Or the U.S. would likely take a much more aggressive approach if it seems that Russia was going to use tanks, armored vehicles, and troops to attack Finland. The United States would likely send similar types of weapons that they've proven to be effective in Ukraine. 100%. The great thing for both Finland and the U.S. and
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Ryan. I'm a former commando from the UK, and this is part 2 of US reaction if Russia attacks Finland. So, first video will be up there somewhere, guys, if you want to go watch that. Doing really well. This is the second part. We're going to get into it. It'll be about 15 minutes long or so stick around, get a cup of coffee, cup of tea, or a whiskey if you're from Tennessee, and I'll see you in the comments, troops. Let's get into it.
This scenario is that they literally know what works well and what works really well against the Russian military. The U.S. would send javelins to allow Finland's far inferior numbers to decimate Russian tanks and vehicles. The javelin is a fire-and-forget weapon because the missile locks onto its target before being launched.
Awesome bit of kit, especially for light troops on the ground who want to, pack a big punch. Infanteers can be trained on this relatively easy. Yes, you might have to specialize in certain areas of the infantry, but in the Royal Marines, this was used to very good effect in various operations around the world.
This means that when the Finnish troops fire at a Russian target, they can immediately fall back to cover even before the missile hits its mark. This would provide the Finns with excellent mobility and striking power that Russia would not be able to deal with.
Especially when you're talking in terms of the kit and equipment that Russia is using at this moment in time. Some of the armor on the tanks that they got is just not up to scratch, guys, at all.
Like in Ukraine, the Finnish landscape would be littered with the husks of destroyed Russian tanks. Along with the javelins, the U.S. would also send M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system, or the HIMARS. The U.S. Army identifies HIMARS as a full-spectrum, combat-proven, all-weather, 24/7, lethal and responsive wheeled precision strike weapon system.
Fully-fledged fighter machine.
And at least in the war in Ukraine, this has been absolutely true. HIMARS can launch 6 long-range rockets either simultaneously or at different times, and then immediately move its position to get out of danger. The rocket's range is about 50 miles or between 70 to 80 kilometers. These vehicles would allow Finland to decimate any Russian forces within their borders and push them back out of their territory.
Yeah, so what he's saying there is effectively, to a degree, what's happening in Ukraine. When the HIMARS were introduced in that war, it obviously had a massive impact for the better for Ukraine with regards taking out certain areas. We understand that they were able to target weapon facilities, ammo dumps, all of that, and be able to target them quite accurately and sustainable as well. They're a bit of kit that you just need to get the munitions for, have a team working around the clock, and you can literally fire these things and move away and not be seen again. Really, really good, effective bit of kit. We've seen in Ukraine how effective they are. Yeah, they would be exactly the same in Finland.
The rockets are incredibly accurate and would allow the Finnish army to hit targets far behind the front lines, such as weapon caches or command outposts. And we've seen in recent months, the United States would almost certainly send tanks to Finland as well. A-1 Abrams could be used by Finland to launch their own offensives and quickly take back any territory that Russia's invaded. These tanks are state-of-the-art and could make quick work of entire battalions of Soviet-era tanks.
And I think NATO has the ability to be able to facilitate the maintenance of these vehicles a lot easier than some of the vehicles that they've got. So it's not just about the use of this kit and equipment, it's the maintenance thereof once they've got them within their in their grasp, so to speak. There's no point having a one-use tank, all right? It breaks down, forget about it. That's not how NATO works. So I think the facility to correctly maintain these things is there, which is a good thing.
Of course, the United States would also send guns, explosives, and artillery rounds just like they have in Ukraine. The United States may even take things a step further and provide Finland with more aircraft, or at least expedite the delivery of the F-35 Lightning IIs that Finland's already purchased. What it comes down to is that the U.S. would not hesitate to deliver military aid to Finland. As the war progressed in Ukraine, the U.S. has ramped up its commitment to deliver weapons and vehicles that the Ukrainian military desperately needs. However, if Russia was to invade Finland, the response by the United States would likely be much more immediate.
It would be much more immediate. We have to look at it from a NATO standpoint now. It's a different scenario. It wouldn't just be a massive response from the United States. It'd be a massive response from NATO. Granted, I get it. The United States is the biggest player within NATO, so yeah, granted, they're going to be the first to be able to respond effectively, and I mean effectively in terms of kit, equipment, infrastructure, okay? That can be provided straight away. You've got countries like the UK, all right, little brother of America, or big brother, whichever way you want to look into it, guys. And we'd probably be able to provide not necessarily the infrastructure that America could, but the knife edge of kit and equipment, good solid troops on the ground to be able to do what they need to do until Americans arrive. Okay, but this is something that I hope never happens.
To put this into perspective, the United States has sent close to $80 billion in aid to Ukraine since the war began. The U.S. has the largest economy in the world, and although $80 billion is a lot of money, it's only a drop in the bucket when it comes to the U.S. defense spending.
Yeah, but biggest economy in the world, but who has the biggest growing economy? You have to look at China and their economy and how it's grown. Not just it's not just the overall money within the country. It's overall satisfaction of the people who's in that country as well. If you look at wages and stuff like that, hasn't really changed that much. Granted, it has over the past 20 years in America and England and stuff, but it's really, really improved in China. Okay, everything's getting better over there. So yeah, they've got a lot of contenders in that as well. And if you look at Russia, who are their main battle partners, so to speak, or who could be their main battle partners, you have to look at China as well, who've also got a big economy.
In 2021, the United States spent about $801 billion on its military.
That's crazy.
There is little doubt that Congress would pass a Finnish relief bill that would authorize huge sums of money and weapons to be sent to Finland if they were ever invaded by Russia. There's also the possibility that the United States would take a much more aggressive stance if Russia started to amass troops on the Finnish border. Rather than waiting until Russia invaded, the U.S. could deploy its own forces in a joint operation with Finland, which would
joint operations normally look like something quite peaceful. I remember when I went to Africa in Gabon, we were there for quite simply a training operation, if you want to put it that way. We were there to train to become adaptable in a jungle environment in terms of soldiering. We were there to get acquainted with the jungle, okay? But then you look at what happened on the border within the past few months of us being there. A few months before, there was a bit of trouble and unrest in the Central African Republic with certain terrorist groups and stuff. So having 100 Marines across the border in the jungle, training with the French Foreign Legion and French Special Forces, it does make a big difference. So that's how I would see them actually getting there in the first place, okay? There with joint bilateral training, as we mentioned yesterday, bilateral training packages working cohesively together and improving their skill set. But politically, you got troops on the ground ready to deploy if need be. So method in the madness.
Act as a deterrent for Russia. If Russia invaded and American troops were caught in the crossfire, it may be seen as an act of war against the U.S.
Yeah.
They could claim that Russia was not only the aggressor but attacked American troops intentionally, allowing the U.S. to declare war on Russia. This tactic has been used by NATO in recent months as they send more and more troops to countries that share a border with Ukraine. This has been done to stop any further progress Russia could make if it won the war. The moment Russia attacks a NATO force, either on purpose or by accident, all nations, including the United States, would declare war on Russia, and that's not a war Putin could win. And this brings up another interesting point about a Russian invasion of Finland. Sweden and Finland applied to join NATO in May of 2022. Neither country has been accepted yet due to Hungary and Turkey holding out on their ratification. However, there might be a way for the United States and NATO to get around this technicality if Finland were attacked. Finland is a member of the European Union. Until recently, Finland has tried to maintain its neutrality, but an aggressive Russia has caused them to drop that stance and seek alliances. Since the countries in the EU engage in the common security and defense policy, Finland could invoke this article if Russia attacked, which would bring other European nations to their aid.
Sure.
If Russia continues to wage war while other EU forces are in Finland, it could be considered an act of war against those nations, many of which are NATO members. This would inevitably trigger Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, and every member of NATO would declare war on Russia, including the U.S.
So, in a nutshell, almighty hell would break loose if that was the case. So, you can understand pretty much why Finland wanted to gain access to NATO so quickly, especially when you had Russia and Ukraine kicking off. It wouldn't surprise me if a few more countries want to join suit. We've actually talked about that in the past as well.
Ukraine was an EU candidate when Russia invaded, so it did not have the benefit of the common security and defense policy. Finland, however, is a much different story. They're currently a member of the European Union, which means if Russia invaded, it is highly probable the US would find some way to join the other European NATO members in declaring war against Russia. Scenario 2. Russia uses gray zone tactics and launches conventional missiles into Finland, but does not invade. If Russia attacked Finland by firing missiles or disrupting its trading capabilities in the Baltic Sea through blockades, the US's response would likely be slightly different than if there was a full-on invasion. These disruption tactics would definitely cause concern, and if missiles were fired, Finland and the rest of NATO would certainly call it an act of war, but they might not retaliate with force. There would undoubtedly be a misinformation campaign by Russia saying the West was setting them up or the missiles were an accident, but in reality the rest of the world would know such an attack was meant to scare Finland and the rest of Europe into making concessions. This might have been more effective before the war in Ukraine, but if Russia tried to pull a stunt like this today, the US would have none of it.
Yeah, I don't think it would be tolerated, that kind of crap, to be fair, guys. But talking about tolerance, and I know this is slightly off topic, and a one that I'm happy to get involved with in the comments section, when they're talking about that scenario there, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the scenario with Israel and Palestine. Okay, don't want to get too in deep over it, but I'll let you guys elaborate further in the comments. I'm happy to chat with you guys on that. What do you think of that?
It's possible that, like with Taiwan, the US might openly state that if Russia continued to be aggressive or invaded Finland, the US would stand by them. This is not so much an alliance as a promise. In this case, the US would almost certainly deploy troops to Finland and NATO countries nearby in preparation for a retaliatory strike into Russia. This would be done to deter any further Russian aggression, and it would likely work, as Putin knows that even at its strongest, the Russian military could never defeat the US. Perhaps one of the best indicators of what the US would do in this scenario is by looking at what they've already done. In November of 2022, President Joe Biden approved a $323 million arms sale to Finland. This sale included tactical missiles and joint standoff weapons.
Actually, it's crazy, but it's also not that crazy when you look into the fact that their yearly budget is $801 billion. So it's a lot of money, but it's not really like scratching the surface when you think about what America does have.
So it seems the US is already helping Finland prepare for a conflict with Russia. There's no other reason for Finland to procure tactical missiles from the US other than to mount a defense or act as a deterrent against a Russian attack. But
defense and deterrent.
Things don't stop there. The US then approved an additional $380 million sale of missiles to Finland only days after the first arms deal went through. The second sale was possibly for Stinger anti-aircraft missile launchers and other similar equipment. As of right now, the US and Finland believe that a Russian attack by air is the most likely scenario if Putin dares to become aggressive against Finland. The United States released a statement explaining that the proposed sale will improve Finland's defense and deterrence capabilities. Finland intends to use these defense articles and services to increase its national stock. This critical platform will bolster the land and air defense capabilities in Europe's northern flank, supporting U.S. European Command's top priorities.
It's smart when you think what America's doing. They're indirectly, instead of having their troops in Finland, they can just arm the troops within that country, that friendly country per se, up to the teeth with all the kit and equipment approved by them. They make a sale in the process, and they've got effectively an ally in another country who's armed up to the teeth, stopping Russia progressing anywhere further forward of their country. It's pretty smart. Yeah. What do you think about that, guys? Is it borderline provocative? That's what I want to know, though. Is it borderline provocative? Or is it just damn right provocative? Are they provoking Russia into these things? I don't know. Let me know, guys.
This makes it very clear that even though Russia is in no position to attack Finland, the United States and NATO are still proactively working to deter even the thought of Putin setting his sights on his Nordic neighbor. However, if the mad dictator decided to launch an attack anyway, Finland would already have some defenses ready to go. And there is little doubt that if the missiles were launched or aircraft were used by Russia to attack Finland, the US would make it one of its top priorities to get Finland the anti-air defense capabilities they need. It's also probable that the US would deploy more forces to the region, similar similar to scenario number 1, to send a message to Russia if the attacks continue, things will escalate. It's hard to imagine a scenario where Russia becomes an aggressor and the US doesn't find a way to insert itself into the conflict in Finland. Both nations have already been actively working together to prepare for such a scenario that the foundation is already in place. The US is willing and able to play an active role in the defense of Finland if it ever comes to it. Scenario 3. Russia attacks Finland with nuclear weapons. This is something that scares the hell out of me, guys. But at the same time, I just don't see it happening. It can't possibly, in 2023, get to that point where this is something that we think is a possibility. Maybe I'm being very naive, but I'd like to think I'm not naive. Having served in the military, I understand, the military-industrial complex a little bit. I understand that doing that would obviously not just end the privileges of those in the immediate vicinity of those nuclear weapons, but it would also remove the privileges of those perpetrators behind the nuclear weapons, okay? If one nuke goes off, another goes off, another goes off, another goes off. Everyone's getting involved. Everyone's involved in nuclear warfare. Those privileges are ruined for everyone. All right, it's not just us who can't go on holiday in that beach in the Bahamas. It's Putin as well. And, these dictators we've spoke about, this is selfish. All right, they think of themselves. And it kind of is over for them as well. So we have to look logically into this. Do they really want to end life as they know it as well? I don't think they're that power hungry, all right? They want to enjoy the fruits of this world as well. Traveling to nice places, doing nice things, having tequilas on the beach and stuff like that. You get me. This is my thought pattern anyway. Surely they're not that stupid. Or are they? Is definitely the most unlikely scenario, but one worth examining. Finland does not have any nuclear weapons within its borders, at least that we know of. Therefore, a nuclear strike against Finland would be met by a unified global response against Russia. Pretty much every nation in the world, including China, would condemn Russia's actions. The United States would immediately go on high alert, and every branch of the U.S. nuclear triad would await striking orders. U.S. submarines would deploy to strategic locations alongside the Russian coast. B-2 bombers would take to the air and infiltrate Russian airspace. Land-based ballistic missile command centers would double-check trajectories over the Arctic to ensure optimal accuracy. A nuclear launch against Finland would absolutely bring the US and Russia to the brink of war. Not to mention, the rest of NATO would also actively be arming their nukes just in case Putin decided to launch any more missiles. This would be an end-of-the-world scenario. As we said, this is highly unlikely, but if the scenario ever did occur, the US would be at the forefront of bringing Putin and Russia to its knees. A Russian nuclear strike against Finland probably wouldn't result in World War III because China has made it clear it would not support Russia using nukes in Ukraine or in general. China itself has a strict defensive-only policy when it comes to using nuclear weapons, and no matter which way Putin spends it, launching a nuke at Finland would never be seen as a defensive action. North Korea might back Russia, but Finland, the US, and NATO have little to fear from North Korea. Japan and other East Asian countries that have closely allied themselves with the West would need to be slightly more wary, but North Korea's military capabilities are pretty limited as it mostly relies on old Soviet tech and nuclear missiles that may or may not achieve liftoff before detonating.
And let's be honest, guys, terrible as it sounds, it's true. People in North Korea are starving, all right? They're worried about their next meal. Are they really going to be able to sustain a decent fight? I don't think so. You can only operate hungry for so long. These people are starving in that country, starving, beaten down, Detroit. They don't know anything about the outside world, unfortunately. I don't see them being victorious in any battle, personally, especially with a leader such as him,
It's also probable that China would keep North Korea in check if Russia launched a nuclear attack on
100%.
Finland, as they do not want to see the world end in a nuclear holocaust either. So if Putin ever launched nukes at Finland, the US would not be the only country coming to their aid. It would likely be a worldwide effort to remove Putin from power and make sure no further nuclear weapons are deployed. However, if the US felt that Russia would launch more nukes at Finland, or any other part of the world for that matter, it might feel warranted to launch its own nuclear attack against Russia to send a clear message that they are done messing around. These strikes would target already known Russian launch sites to hopefully destroy them before more nukes can be used. This could result in a series of exchanges that would leave parts of the planet irradiated and result in the loss of countless lives.
Countless needless lives, guys, okay? It would be formidable. Far beyond people's imagination, trust me.
Scenario 4. The most likely scenario. Russia is too weak to attack Finland. Even if the US hadn't already engaged in providing support, weapons, and joint military operations with Finland, Russia is in no position to invade another country. It is badly losing the war in Ukraine thanks to the resolve of the Ukrainian people and the weapons sent by the West. Men are being conscripted from across Russia to be used as cannon fodder as Putin desperately tries to hold on to the little territory Russia still controls in Ukraine. The scenarios discussed in this video would almost certainly lead to the Russian military being decimated, as they could not hope to fight two different countries simultaneously. Putin just doesn't have the strategic capabilities or resources at his disposal, and with each scenario, it's almost inevitable that the US would get involved in some way. The most likely outlook for the future of Russia right now is that they'll continue to fight in Ukraine until more Western tanks and weapons arrive, and the Ukrainian military eventually pushes them completely out of their country. At that point, Vladimir Putin will have to admit defeat, and the repercussions for his regime will be drastic. At the very least, he'll lose the faith of the Russian people, and his power will be greatly diminished. There would be no hope for a Russian victory if it launched any type of attack against Finland.
I mean, I might be wrong on this, but my thought pattern on it is this. I've just been thinking now as I've been watching the video. It never really ends good for people like this. There's never really a good ending. There's a good ending to the story. When you look at the history of, and I don't want to use the term dictators or anything like that, but if you look at individuals like him, it just doesn't have a bright, happy ending, does it? Okay, it always ends up in some form of tragedy. Either they've pressed the button and they've caused absolute chaos, catastrophe on a massive scale, or the button's pressed and they're taken out. Okay, either way, I don't think there's a good ending to his story. What do you think? How does it end for Putin?
Finland. In fact, an attack against Finland would be the nail in the coffin for Russia, as it would likely result in the US and members of the European Union taking a much more aggressive action, or perhaps even declaring war on Russia. And since Russia can't defeat the much smaller Ukrainian military, it has no hope of winning a war against the US and its allies. So the probability of Russia attacking Finland is small. We'll never say never, as Vladimir Putin has clearly shown he's out of his mind, but if Russia ever did attack Finland, the United States' response would be swift and merciless. Now watch how
swift and merciless, to sum up that video. US reaction if Russia attacks Finland. Guys, before I get into my post thoughts on that video, please consider joining the Patreon. Patreon is a place where I put all of my ad-free, uncensored content, stuff that I cannot put on YouTube, things that are Ukraine orientated, war orientated, where I'm giving you combat footage breakdowns. I put on there, all right, because it's a better place to be able to do it. I don't have to worry about censorship or guidelines and stuff like that. That's where I'm doing it from. So if you want to see, you know, the bread and butter of my type of content that I can break down from a military perspective as a Royal Marines Commando, that's the place to do it. Link is in the description. It costs a coffee a month, even less, I think. So please, please, please consider doing that. And in the process, you really are helping me out, guys, okay? So please consider joining Patreon. I can't emphasize that enough. But great video. US reaction if Russia attacks Finland. So do I think it's likely? No. If it happened, would America intervene militarily? They have to, based on, you know, their ties with Europe and NATO now. They have to, effectively, otherwise the whole point of NATO collapses. So, yes, they would respond militarily. I think they'd respond in an escalated way, all right? It'd be an escalation process in mind, but it depends on what the Russians would do. So if they went straight in with nukes and stuff, then obviously the reaction to that is going to be is going to match that, isn't it? So really good video. I like that one. You guys do too, based on the analytics. So please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And I just want to say thank you if you're brand new to the channel, guys. I really do appreciate it. But other than that, original video link will be in the description, and I'll see you tomorrow. Peace.